A single shot shattered the penthouse window, raining shards of glass like frozen tears onto marble floors below. The city skyline, glittering coldly beyond, seemed indifferent to betrayal and bloodshed. Inside, the truth burned quietly. Smoldering documents lay twisted in flames, secrets dissolving into smoke. A woman stood trembling in the chaos, her breath ragged, eyes wide with the fear that comes only when trust implodes. Somewhere, sirens wailed, distant but inevitable. She had believed in a love stronger than greed, a loyalty deeper than lies. But tonight she learned every fortress has its cracks, every alliance its breaking point. Soon, everything she knew would unravel in violence and revelation. Tonight, the reckoning began. June Harrow pulled her coat tight against the biting cold as she realized her keycard no longer unlocked the front door to the penthouse on Madison Avenue. A sudden wind whipped through the high-rise corridor, rattling the overhead light as if echoing her shock. For the past 3 decades, this was the home she shared with her husband, Philip Harrow, the esteemed CEO of Harrow Capital Investments. Their marriage had begun with the promise of partnership. She was once a brilliant software engineer, her ideas championed in the early days of the tech boom. But as Philip's ambition grew, so did his need to dominate every aspect of their lives. June fumbled with the card, trying it again, but the small LED on the lock remained stubbornly red. It was nearly midnight. She was jet-lagged from a 2-day trip to visit her aging aunt in Boston, and all she wanted was a warm shower in the comfort of her own bedroom. Then came the footsteps behind her. It was Walter, the longtime doorman who had greeted her with a smile for years, now looking sheepish and burdened. "Mrs. Harrow," he began, voice trembling, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Harrow informed management that effective today, I'm to escort you out." He looked genuinely pained, his eyes full of apology as he held out a folded piece of paper. June's heart hammered against her ribs. She snatched the note, reading Philip's curt message. "We will discuss everything once you get my lawyer's call. Please vacate the premises tonight." It was brutal. No explanation, no courtesy, just an eviction from the life they had built. She could almost hear his calm, businesslike tone behind every word. Her mind raced. Why now, after she had stood by him for so long? The man she remembered from their youth, soft-spoken, always brainstorming world-changing innovations with her, had morphed into a titan of finance whose daily existence revolved around profit margins and social clout. June blinked hard, trying to hold back the wave of anger and heartbreak. She didn't want to break down here, in front of Walter. She wanted answers, yet a part of her already suspected that Philip had made a calculated move, something meticulously orchestrated, and she would find out soon enough how deep the betrayal ran. Instead of causing a scene, June collected her thoughts and forced a tight-lipped smile. "I understand," she said quietly, swallowing the lump in her throat. Walter helped her retrieve the small carry-on suitcase she'd left by the door. As they stepped into the private elevator, she remembered the quiet tapping of her father's typewriter late at night in her childhood home. He'd always told her that trust is built like a house, one brick at a time, but betrayal can knock it all down in an instant. The elevator bell chimed in the lobby, returning June to the harsh reality of the moment she was locked out, cast aside like an inconvenient business partner. No, not even that, like a stranger trespassing in the life she thought she owned. Outside, a harsh winter wind whipped at her hair as June stood on the curb, dazed. The city lights of Manhattan sparkled around her, and cabs zoomed by. She had never felt so unmoored, not even in her struggling college years when she balanced 3 part-time jobs to support her mother. The shock gave way to adrenaline, fueling her next move. She needed somewhere to go, somewhere safe. Her mind spun with possibilities, each one overshadowed by the terrifying fact that her bank accounts could already be frozen by Philip's legal maneuvers. She had a savings account of her own, but had she left enough assets unreachable by him? She wasn't sure. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she noticed half a dozen missed calls from a blocked number and one text from an unknown sender. "This is Mark, Dad. Wants me to pick you up." "Where are you, Mark Harrow?" Her 22-year-old son was finishing college in California. Philip must have cajoled him into sending a message. Even that felt like a betrayal. But her motherly instinct told her Mark might be caught in the middle. Unaware of the full picture, she typed back, "I'm fine. Tell your father I'll be in touch." Refusing to stand in the freezing cold any longer, she waved down a cab and gave the address of a boutique hotel near Central Park, somewhere quiet, where she could collect her thoughts. The moment she closed the taxi door, her phone rang again. The screen showed the name Georgia Williams. A wave of relief washed over June. Georgia was her oldest friend and former colleague, a brilliant cybersecurity specialist. They had once co-founded a startup in the early 1990s that tackled data encryption, but June sold her shares when Philip convinced her it was time to focus on family priorities. She had rarely regretted that decision until now. Now, when her entire life had been derailed by the man who insisted he was taking care of her. Georgia's voice came through the line. "June, I heard something was happening. I got wind of some chatter from a corporate lawyer friend. Are you okay?" June closed her eyes, wanting to cry just hearing a voice that cared. In 2 hurried minutes, she poured out what had happened: the locked door, Walter's sorrowful face, the abrupt note from Philip. Georgia sounded furious. The nerve of him. You do realize he's probably been planning this for a while, right? A man like Philip doesn't just up and decide to freeze you out on a whim. Nodding to herself, June murmured, "I suspect. Something about the way he's been acting these last few years. But I never thought he'd push it this far. Not after everything." The cab pulled up to the hotel, and she paid in cash, mindful not to leave a digital trail Philip could trace. Once inside the warmly lit lobby, June found a seat by a flickering fireplace and inhaled deeply. "Calm down," she told herself. "You have your wits, your skills, and a few old contacts who know the financial world." She glanced at her phone's background image, Mark's 8th-grade graduation photo. For him, for her younger self, and for the dignity she still possessed, she resolved she would not be defeated by Philip's power plays. This was war, and she intended to fight back. That night in the hotel, June hardly slept. She moved furniture to block the door, an irrational gesture given she was in a reputable establishment, but paranoia gnawed at her. Memories drifted back to her father's old farmhouse in upstate New York, where she spent summers reading about computer science breakthroughs on a secondhand laptop. Her father, once a respected financial consultant, had lost everything in a scandal she was too young to understand the details. But she remembered the sense of betrayal and helplessness that consumed the household. Now the cycle seemed to be repeating. Except she was no child. She had to stand on her own. Unable to rest, she cracked open her laptop at the small writing desk. She typed in a string of commands, a leftover reflex from her coding days, hoping to poke around online for clues about what Philip was doing. Sure enough, there were hush-hush whispers in certain tech finance forums about Harrow Capital's contingency plans. Though the details were cryptic, she made a mental note to call Georgia in the morning to see if she could help trace the breadcrumbs. If Philip was funneling money or forging documents, June intended to uncover every digit of wrongdoing. An hour later, hunger forced her downstairs to the hotel's cafe, Au Bestel. She clutched a simple black coffee and a stale croissant, barely tasting either. The news broadcast on a muted TV caught her eye. The anchor was discussing a sudden shakeup at Harrow Capital. The stock price had dipped by a few points, apparently triggered by rumors that their CEO was restructuring. June frowned. Philip might be sending signals to the market that he was making organizational changes, perhaps attributing them to normal business evolutions. In truth, he was likely clearing the deck for an eventual separation from her. She felt a flash of anger that the public narrative would be so sanitized compared to her raw emotional reality. By mid-morning, she'd assembled a mental list of tasks, secure immediate access to any money not already in joint accounts, gather proof of her contributions to Harrow Capital's success, and contact an attorney who wasn't under Philip's powerful thumb. As she scrolled through her phone, she realized how limited her circle had become. Over the years, she had let go of many friendships under the guise of "it's just too busy right now" or "Philip needs me at this charity event." People drifted away. Now, in her hour of need, her contact list felt pitifully short, yet she refused to be defeated by regret. She set up a meeting with a lawyer recommended by Georgia, someone outside Manhattan, away from Philip's sphere of influence. Before she left the hotel, her phone chimed with another text from Mark's mom. "Dad says I should stay out of this, but I'm worried. Are you sure you're okay?" The maternal part of her ached to call him, to reassure him that none of this was his fault, but she typed a neutral reply instead, not wanting to drag him into the crossfire. "I'm handling it. Focus on school. Love you." She feared if Mark tried to help her, Philip would turn on him too, and she couldn't bear that. June visited the lawyer, a woman named Stella Harding, who operated out of a modest office in Queens. The difference from a midtown Manhattan skyscraper was stark, no-polished marble floors, no glass-walled conference rooms with panoramic views. Instead, mismatched furniture and scuffed floors greeted her, but Stella's demeanor radiated calm confidence. "I specialize in complex divorces and hidden asset cases," Stella said, leaning forward. "I've seen your husband's name in some interesting circles. You need to understand he's likely many steps ahead already." That admission would have terrified June the night before, but now it only solidified her resolve. She had begun to suspect that her marriage had devolved into a labyrinth of manipulations, each door locked behind her back. She detailed to Stella the abrupt eviction, the potential freezing of accounts, and her suspicion that Philip was building a fortress around their shared wealth. Stella took careful notes, occasionally glancing up with narrowed eyes as if to confirm a suspicion. "Eisen, your timeline suggests he's been moving assets offshore for at least a year. Maybe longer," Stella remarked. "He might even have used your name to secure certain deals, making you unwittingly liable if anything is uncovered." The idea that she could be legally implicated in something she knew nothing about sent June's heart racing. She clenched her fists, remembering how she'd helped Philip set up a digital ledger system years back. She'd coded security protocols for Harrow Capital's in-house software, never imagining those same protocols might someday be used to lock her out. Her nails bit into her palms, fueling her determination. "Whatever it takes, I need to protect myself and my son," she told Stella. After an hour of intense discussion, Stella recommended a game plan first. File a preliminary motion to ensure no additional assets could be transferred without joint approval. Second, check for any dormant accounts June might still have from her single days, especially from her time in the tech world. Third, gather personal records that prove her intellectual contribution to Harrow Capital. If you coded his systems, that's valuable intellectual property, Stella said, tapping the desk. Proving you contributed significantly can influence how the courts view marital property. Leaving Stella's office, June was struck by how out of body it all felt. The marriage she once cherished was now an adversarial battleground. the warmth of partnership replaced by the chill of strategic warfare. On the sidewalk, she exhaled a steaming breath, scanning her phone for the next step. That's when she spotted an unexpected voicemail from her old friend, Dr. Hector Kim, an economist who had once worked briefly with Philip on a private think tank. Perhaps he'd seen something telling. She pressed play, and his voice crackled June. I'm not sure if this is relevant, but I came across some irregularities tied to Harrow Capital. Let's talk soon. And be careful. The message ended abruptly, leaving her with a roiling sense that the pieces of a massive puzzle were swirling around her, waiting to lock into place. Before heading back to the hotel, June decided to make one detour to a place she hadn't visited in years, her late father's farmhouse in Cold Spring, 2 hours north of the city. If there was any solace to be found in the world, it might be in those creaky floors and peeling wallpaper that once witnessed her earliest ambitions. Renting a car under her maiden name, June navigated out of Manhattan. Traffic bled into open highways, and soon the landscape shifted to rolling hills and bare trees silhouetted against a wintry gray sky. As she drove, memories flooded back. The final day her father spent in that farmhouse, packing up documents after learning he had been accused of financial misconduct. She was only 10 then, but the fear in his eyes was unforgettable. He always told her to keep a secret nest egg, to never let any partner, no matter how trusted, have total financial control over her. She'd brushed it off as paranoia from a man burned by the system. But now, she couldn't stop hearing his voice urging her to stay vigilant. When she arrived at the old farmhouse, the driveway was slick with ice, and a lone crow perched on the sagging porch railing. The lock on the door was rusted, but yielded easily when she turned the key. Inside, the smell of dust and memories overwhelmed her. Plastic sheets covered most of the furniture. Carefully, she pulled one off an antique desk in the living room. This was where her father once spent nights hunched over ledgers, trying to prove his innocence. On the wall still hung an old family photograph, a younger June with big glasses and a beaming smile, her father's protective arm around her shoulders. She busied herself checking if the electricity still worked. It did, barely, and scrounging up firewood. As the small fireplace crackled to life, she felt a pang of relief. Here, at least, she wasn't under the glare of Manhattan's judgments. It felt oddly empowering to be alone with her thoughts. She set her laptop on the desk and tethered to her phone's data. Then she began systematically combing through any electronic traces she could find of Philip's recent financial maneuvers emails, digital footprints, shell company names she'd overheard. It was a rough, incomplete puzzle, but she recognized signs of a sophisticated labyrinth. Some of the corporate entities traced back to addresses in the Cayman Islands, others in Luxembourg. Hours passed. The sun dipped behind the pine trees, and the farmhouse interior fell into a dim gloom. Just as she was about to shut her laptop, she discovered something peculiar, a set of coded references in Harrow Capital's online repositories, disguised as routine line items. Her heart raced. This might be the hidden key to unlocking Philip's offshore empire. She saved everything onto an external drive. Then, hunger gnawing at her, she rummaged through an old pantry for any canned goods. Finding a can of soup far past its prime, she laughed ruefully. I'm basically camping in my own father's living room to hide from my husband. The situation was absurd, but also a testament to her resourcefulness. She would endure. She would find a way. And if the ghosts of her father's past could serve as any warning, it was to never underestimate the web of deceit powerful men could spin when cornered. End of Part 1. Paragraphs 1 to 5 found. Below you will find Part 1. Paragraphs 6 to 10 continuing seamlessly. Each paragraph remains around 550 words to maintain pacing and contribute to our 15,000 plus total word count goal. June awoke to pale sunlight filtering through the dusty curtains, her muscles aching from a fitful sleep on a couch too small for comfort. The temperature had dropped drastically overnight, and she shivered as she stirred the fireplace embers back to life. Today, she decided, would be the day she reached out to her son Mark in earnest. She glanced at her phone, which showed multiple texts from him, each more worried than the last. Part of her wanted to call immediately, but she hesitated if Mark truly was under Philip's watchful eye. Any conversation could be monitored or manipulated. Instead, she sent a short message. I love you. I'm safe. I'll explain when the time is right. Then she clicked on Georgia's number. If anyone could make sense of the suspicious data she found, it was Georgia Williams. The phone rang once, twice, then connected. I've been waiting to hear from you, Georgia said, a note of relief in her voice. Tell me everything. June recounted her discoveries, especially the coded references in Harrow Capital's systems. She described the farmhouse, the old desk, and how she felt her father's lingering shadow guiding her. Georgia listened patiently, then replied, Send me whatever you have. I'll analyze it from my end, but be careful if Philip's watchers detect your online activity. They'll know you're digging. Use a secure VPN and keep rotating your login credentials. After the call, June meticulously followed Georgia's instructions. She established an encrypted connection, compressed and password protected her findings, then fired it off to Georgia's personal server, which was rumored to be more secure than many bank vaults. A sense of camaraderie rushed through her. She might not have an army, but she had allies, people who believed in her. Next, she tried to recall if there were any old accounts in her maiden name that Philip couldn't touch. Years ago, she had co-developed a piece of software for an academic project, and the royalties had trickled in modestly. Could that be a lifeline? Her memory jolted at the name Silver Maple Tech, a small firm that managed the licensing. She searched the farmhouse for her ancient filing box, rummaging through old diaries and receipts. Finally, she found it a short contract with Silver Maple Tech, dated 15 years ago, well before she and Philip had centralized their finances. The contract guaranteed her a small percentage for each commercial installation of the software. It hadn't been much back then, maybe a couple $100 a month, but if it still existed, it might have accrued interest or back payments. Fired up, she dialed the company's main line. An automated system directed her through a maze of prompts until a bored-sounding intern picked up. After transferring her 3 times, she landed on a manager who confirmed that, yes, there was a dormant account under the name June Whitaker, her maiden name with an accumulated balance. We mailed checks for about a year, but they were never cashed, so the funds have been sitting in escrow, the manager explained. Would you like to update your information? Elation mingled with disbelief. There was at least some cushion left. She provided a newly acquired P.O. box address, ensuring the checks wouldn't go anywhere near her penthouse or Philip's domain. As she hung up, she caught herself smiling for the first time in days. You're not powerless, she reminded herself. Yes, Philip might have the upper hand financially, but she was resourceful. She had old networks, old skills, and a determination forged in heartbreak. That would have to be enough for now. Late that afternoon, June decided to venture into the nearby town of Cold Spring to purchase groceries and a few essentials. Her reflection in the car's rearview mirror startled her. The usually composed, carefully groomed socialite now appeared with disheveled hair and dark circles beneath her eyes. She almost laughed at the contrast, but the truth was, she felt oddly liberated. Without the constraints of public appearance, she could focus on something deeper, her own survival. As she rolled into the quaint downtown, the smell of wood smoke and the sight of local shops brought a wave of nostalgia. She parked near a general store that carried everything from canned soup to winter jackets. Inside, she picked up supplies, thick socks, a small toolbox, extra batteries, and non-perishable foods. While browsing, she overheard a local radio broadcast discussing a turmoil at Harrow Capital. The anchor mentioned speculation about Philip's personal life affecting the company's direction. June's gut twisted. It's starting, she thought. The media is sniffing around. She paid for her items in cash. As she pushed through the store's door, her phone buzzed. Another text from Mark's mom. Dad says you're going through something. He wants me to stay out of it, but I need to know you're okay. I'm flying back this weekend. Her heart pounded. Mark was coming back. That could escalate everything. She typed a reply, telling him she was fine, but the message refused to send. Low signal. She cursed under her breath. Just then, a familiar figure stepped onto the sidewalk, a short, older woman with curly gray hair and a fierce expression. It was Millicent Adams, the attorney who'd once helped June's father in his final months of legal battles. June froze. Had Millicent recognized her? Yes, their eyes met. A flicker of sympathy crossed Millicent's face. She approached, shaking her head. I read about you and Philip in the news, she said softly. I'm sorry it's come to this. June? June found herself spilling a little of her predicament, though she was careful not to reveal the farmhouse's exact location. Millicent listened quietly, then patted June's hand. If you need local counsel for anything property disputes, personal matters, reach out. I'm semi-retired, but I remember the injustices your father faced. You have my card. Her voice was warm, tempered by the wisdom of years. The encounter reminded June that not everyone in the legal world was out to bury her. Some actually cared about justice. Afterwards, June headed back to the farmhouse, the sun already dipping low. She tried once more to text Mark, but the signal was gone. Perhaps the old landline inside the farmhouse still functioned. She parked near the porch and carried her supplies inside, noticing how quickly the temperature plummeted at sunset. She lit the fireplace again and reached for the dusty phone perched on a small table in the living room. To her surprise, it still had a dial tone. She immediately called Mark's cell. He answered in a rush, relief evident in his voice. Mom, I've been so worried. She could hear him walking briskly. Airport announcements echoed in the background. He admitted that he'd booked a flight anyway. Contrary to Philip's suggestion, June told him to wait, not to get caught in the middle, but Mark insisted he wanted to help. I'm an adult. Mom, let me do something. I hate seeing you shut out like this. A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to shield him from Philip's manipulations, but she also yearned for his support. All right, she said after a moment's hesitation. We'll figure out a way, but be careful around your father. He's not the man we remember, Mark murmured in agreement, then cut the call short as his flight was boarding. Hanging up? June felt a wave of conflicting emotions, pride that her son was stepping up, dread that this would put him at odds with Philip, and an unshakable determination to see this battle through. No matter how dark it got, she resolved she would not let her family become collateral damage. That evening, June received a secure email from Georgia. The subject line read, Urgent Findings, HCI's Offshore Maze. Her heart thumped as she opened the encrypted attachment, scanning through pages of data. Georgia had unraveled a portion of Harrow Capital Investments' shell companies, many of which were likely under Philip's direct control. The entities linked back to multiple tax havens, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Luxembourg. Georgia highlighted suspicious transactions that, to an untrained eye, might appear as standard corporate dealings. But here they were, neatly arrayed with timestamps, amounts, and the cryptic notations that June had first noticed in the city. A particular line made June's breath catch in her throat. Harrow Family Operating Trust, HFOT disbursement to Archbridge Holdings. According to Georgia's notes, Archbridge was a known front for high-level money laundering. The sums were staggering tens of millions. June found it hard to fathom that Philip, the man who once wrote her heartfelt poems, could be deeply entangled in something so sinister. Yet the evidence was damning. Still, she kept her calm. She knew from her own father's ordeal that confrontation without airtight proof could backfire. She needed a plan. She shot a message back to Georgia. We need an expert in offshore law, someone who can confirm the illegality of these transactions. Also, keep an eye on hush money or bribes. Then she saved the files onto a separate USB drive, tucked it into an envelope, and stashed it in a hidden compartment beneath the farmhouse floorboards. She wasn't about to lose the only leverage she had. Meanwhile, she mulled over the best way to use this information. Taking it straight to the authorities might cause a legal quagmire, especially if Philip had preemptively positioned the narrative that June was unstable or emotional. She needed a strategic reveal, a moment when the evidence would have maximum impact, perhaps in a divorce hearing or a public forum where Philip's influence couldn't easily silence her. Night fell heavily, the farmhouse's old windows rattling in the wind. She set a pot of water to boil on a rusty stove to heat some instant noodles. Reflecting on the bizarre turn her life had taken, a week ago, she was a well-dressed socialite hosting a charity gala, raising funds for children's literacy programs, smiling at cameras while Philip worked the room. Now, she was a fugitive in her own marriage, eating budget noodles by candlelight, unraveling financial conspiracies that spanned continents. Despite the grim circumstances, she found a sense of purpose stirring within her. She was no longer just reacting. She was investigating, planning, gathering forces. This shift reminded her of the early days of her tech career, when she was the one wearing the problem-solving hat. She'd stay up all night debugging code or designing architecture for complex encryption algorithms. The rush of creative energy was addictive, and she felt a spark of that again. Perhaps being pushed to the brink was forcing her to rediscover the resilience she had buried under years of comfortable living. Before going to bed, she left a voicemail for Stella, her lawyer, hinting at new evidence. She ended with Stella. If Philip tries to accelerate the divorce or paint me as negligent, I'm ready to push back. And I have proof now, solid proof. Lying down on the makeshift bed, she closed her eyes, imagining the look on Philip's face when he realized the meek, compliant wife he'd locked out had built a fortress of her own. Sleep came swiftly, propelled by the silent, burning determination that tomorrow would bring her one step closer to reclaiming her life. The next morning, June woke to the buzz of her phone. A text from Stella read, "Call me ASAP. Developments on Philip's side. Yeah, my son." She practically leapt from her bed, heart pounding, and dialed Stella's number. On the second ring, Stella answered, her tone clipped. "June, your husband's lawyers filed an emergency motion stating you're potentially mentally unfit and can't handle financial decisions. They're using your sudden disappearance from the penthouse as grounds for concern. The hearing is in 3 days." June's blood ran cold. Mentally unfit, she echoed, appalled. Yet she shouldn't have been surprised this was exactly the kind of manipulative tactic Philip would employ. If the court believed it, he could gain total financial conservatorship over her. She steadied her breathing. "All right, well then we show them I'm not unstable. We present the documentation of his offshore dealings. Right?" There was a pause on the line. "Potentially, yes. But you have to be aware if the court sees that as an act of retaliation rather than a valid claim, It could blow up. We need a measured approach. And we need credible witnesses ready to testify on your behalf that you're perfectly capable of handling your finances. June nodded, though Stella couldn't see her. She was already formulating a plan Georgia could attest to her mental clarity through professional interactions. Maybe Dr. Hector Kim, the economist, could speak about their joint research projects, and she might even call upon Millicent if necessary. Understood. Gather everything, and I'll do the same. I have some major intel from my friend about Philip's illegal transfers. She said, use them as leverage if we must. After the call, she felt an urge to run outside and scream at the frosty sky. Instead, she methodically prepared. She found an old, worn-out duffel bag in the closet, stuffed in a few clothes and her essential documents. She loaded up her car with the groceries she'd purchased, not knowing how long she'd stay at the farmhouse. The upcoming hearing might force her to move back to the city. She left behind the hidden USB drive, but took a second copy with her one she'd keep on her person at all times. Before driving off, she made a crucial call to Georgia. They agreed to meet that afternoon at a diner on the outskirts of the city, somewhere neutral, away from Philip's watchful circle. Georgia sounded optimistic. This mental unfitness angle is a last-ditch ploy. He must be getting desperate if he's resorting to character attacks. I'll do a deep analysis on your data so we can release it at the perfect moment. As she wound down the country roads, a memory surfaced a younger Philip, years ago, praising June's coding prowess when they first met through a mutual colleague. He'd seemed genuinely enthralled by her intellect, insisting he admired a strong woman. Now, that same woman he once admired was being branded as mentally unstable just because she refused to capitulate to his empire. The irony was almost comical. Her phone chimed. Another text from Mark. I'm landing soon. I'll rent a car. Where can we meet? She hesitated, not wanting to risk giving away the farmhouse location. Instead, she suggested a coffee shop near the diner where she'd meet Georgia. In truth, she feared Philip would be tracking Mark. Still, she couldn't shut her son out. He was one of the few bright spots in this unraveling tapestry. With a sigh, she confirmed the plan and prayed that whatever chaos erupted in the next 3 days, her small circle of allies would hold fast. Everything was building toward a showdown. She could sense it, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. The off-ramp to the diner was flanked by bare trees and a half-frozen creek. June parked her car behind the building, avoiding the main lot to minimize visibility. Inside, the diner was a throwback to the 1950s checkerboard floors, neon signage, a jukebox that might or might not work. She spotted Georgia seated at a corner booth, sipping coffee and scanning a tablet. As June slid into the vinyl seat across from her, Georgia tapped a few keys and set the tablet aside. They exchanged a brief hug, then got down to business. Georgia's eyes flashed with determination. I've spent hours parsing the data. Philip didn't just hide money, he engaged in probable money laundering. The sums are too large and irregular to be mere tax avoidance. Georgia lowered her voice. We could be looking at potential criminal charges if the authorities get wind of this. June's stomach churned. She'd known it was big, but hearing criminal charges put it in stark terms. Part of me still struggles to believe he'd go so far, she murmured, wrapping her hands around the warmth of a coffee cup. I guess I wanted to think he had some moral line he wouldn't cross. But maybe not. Just then, the diner's door jingled, and Mark walked in, scanning the booths until he spotted them. With a relieved grin, he strode over and enveloped his mother in a tight embrace. He'd grown taller since she last saw him, and his shoulders were broader a man now, not the little boy who used to cling to her leg. I'm here, he said simply, eyes shining with concern. Whatever you need. June introduced Mark to Georgia, who politely shook his hand. Mark pulled up a chair. Dad's been sending me texts, telling me to stay out of this, but he won't explain what's going on. He just says you're in crisis and that everything's under control. Mom, what the hell is this about? His voice was firm yet tinged with the hurt of a child caught between warring parents. She looked at Georgia, who nodded for her to speak freely. So June carefully explained the gist: the locked out penthouse, the suspicious financial maneuvers, the upcoming hearing accusing her of mental instability. Mark's expression shifted from shock to anger. He's telling me one story and living another. If half of what you're saying is true, then I don't even know who he is anymore. Georgia chimed in gently. Mark, your mother has concrete proof that your father's doing something highly illegal. We just have to be strategic in how we use it. If we present it properly, it could stop him from destroying your mom's reputation and maybe keep him from doing deeper harm. Mark set his jaw. Whatever I can do, I will. Dad's influence at the college or anywhere else doesn't matter to me. I'm not a kid he can manipulate. June placed a hand on his, feeling both proud and protective. He was stepping into a firestorm, but she sensed his resolve. As they finished their coffees, Georgia handed over a small encrypted flash drive. This is your copy, June. I'll keep the master data backed up. No matter what happens, keep it safe and don't let it fall into Philip's hands. Outside, a dark cloud of uncertainty loomed, but inside, she felt a renewed sense of unity. The three of them, mother, son, and loyal friend, were forging a coalition against a man who had cunningly isolated June for years. The road ahead was fraught with legal landmines, but for the first time, she believed they might just come out on top, or at least go down fighting with the truth on their side. They left the diner with a plan. Georgia would remain behind briefly to settle the bill and discreetly slip out, while June and Mark took off in her rental car. The winter sunlight glinted off passing vehicles, reminding June that secrecy was paramount if Philip's reach extended into surveillance or private investigators. They couldn't afford to be followed easily. Mark sank into the passenger seat, fiddling anxiously with the seatbelt. Mom, he said softly once they were on the highway, I always thought Dad was controlling, but I never imagined this. Did you ever see signs of it before? She exhaled, weaving the car around a slow-moving truck. I saw hints, she admitted. We argued about finances, how he centralized everything, how he insisted I let his team manage our money. But I told myself it was normal for a big CEO. I thought, maybe I was just being paranoid. A few miles rolled by in tense silence. Then Mark asked, Where are we going? June hesitated. The farmhouse was her safe haven, but bringing Mark there posed risks if Philip tried to track them. Yet she knew her son needed answers, and they couldn't just wander aimlessly. There's a place upstate, she said carefully. It was my father's. I've been using it as a temporary base. It's not luxurious, but it's off Philip's radar. Mark nodded, determined. I don't need luxury. Mom, I just want to help. His earnestness stirred something deep within June, a mixture of gratitude and regret. Gratitude that he stood by her. Regret that she had once let Philip overshadow her connection with her own son. She tightened her grip on the wheel, vowing to protect Mark at all costs. They stopped for gas at a remote station. As June stepped out, a black SUV pulled in on the far side of the pumps. Her heart lurched, paranoia flaring. Was it one of Philip's goons? She casually peeked around the pump. The driver, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, stepped out with two kids in the back seat. Nothing threatening. June exhaled slowly, realizing how on edge she'd become. Back on the road. She pulled Mark's phone away gently. We should switch yours to airplane mode, she suggested. Philip might track your location if you're on his family plan. Mark blinked, then complied without argument. A fleeting pang crossed his features as he did so, as if acknowledging a line had been crossed. This was no longer a simple father-son disagreement. This was a full-blown war of secrets and betrayal. 2 hours later, they reached the country lanes leading to the farmhouse. Snow lingered on the shoulders of the road, and leafless branches arched overhead, forming a tunnel of skeletal trees. Pulling into the gravel driveway, June felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. The farmhouse was just as she left it, lonely, silent, a sanctuary forged from her father's memory. She parked, turned off the engine, and turned to Mark. "Let's get inside, start a fire, and then we can figure out how to beat your father at his own game." He gave a resolute nod. Together, they trudged on to the porch, the cold air biting at their faces. When June unlocked the door and pushed it open, a sense of both dread and relief washed over her. She was no longer standing alone at the threshold of this battle. Her son was with her now, and that single fact made the old farmhouse feel less like a place of haunted memories and more like the staging ground for a triumphant counter-strike. Inside, the farmhouse bore witness to Mark's surprised glances at the makeshift living conditions. Dusty sheets still covered some furniture, and the faint odor of old wood smoke lingered. "It's rustic," he commented with a half smile, setting his backpack down near the fireplace. June huffed a laugh. "Rustic is one word for it, but it's private. We can talk freely here." They wasted no time. While Mark explored upstairs, finding an extra bed with a worn mattress, June powered up her laptop and rummaged through her notes. She spread out printouts of George's analysis on a weathered table that had once belonged to her father. The soft lamplight revealed columns of numbers, arrows linking corporate entities, and scribbled handwriting in the margins. As she traced the lines, she found an odd sense of exhilaration in the detective work. For so long, she'd lived under Philip's overshadowing presence, rarely flexing her own intellectual might. Now it was all coming back. Mark returned, peering over her shoulder. "Is all of this Dad's doing? Like, is he the mastermind? Or did he get pulled into someone else's scheme?" It was a valid question. Philip might be cunning, but the complexity of these webs suggested a bigger apparatus. June shrugged. "Could be both. He's ambitious enough to orchestrate it, but these shells are sophisticated. It's possible he partnered with other high-level players. They pored over the data together, Mark offering a fresh perspective. He'd taken some finance electives in college, enough to identify suspicious patterns. "Look here," he said, pointing to repeated monthly transactions labeled as consulting fees. "They're transferring the same amount each time to a shell in Bermuda. That's not normal for legitimate consulting." June nodded. "Exactly. And do you see the timestamps? Always on the last day of the month. Classic approach if you're laundering or hiding funds before statements finalize." By the time they paused for a late lunch, the sense of forward momentum was palpable. Mark opened a can of soup while June stoked the fireplace. Steam curled from the pot, and for a moment, they shared a semblance of homely comfort, despite the swirling chaos beyond these walls. "I remember when I was little," Mark mused, stirring the soup. "Dad used to brag about your coding skills to his colleagues, saying you were the brains behind some of his company's early systems." He shook his head sadly. "Hard to reconcile that with the man who now calls you unstable." June sighed, feeling a pang of what could have been. He changed. Or maybe he just revealed who he really was all along. Either way, we're here now. She took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady her. "I'm done playing the victim. Mark, we have to move fast before the hearing. Otherwise, he'll push this narrative about my mental state, and I might lose the ability to defend myself legally." They devised a schedule in the morning. They'd drive to a notary in a nearby town to finalize an affidavit detailing June's mental competency and her long-standing role in creating Harrow Capital's foundational tech. Stella would file it as evidence. Then they'd gather supportive statements from Georgia, possibly Dr. Hector Kim, and anyone else who could vouch for June's clarity. As evening fell, the farmhouse darkened, and they settled in for the night. Mother and son huddled around the fireplace, with a single lamp illuminating the tangle of documents. Though the day had been exhausting, June felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Mark beside her, she finally believed they could fight Philip's legal onslaught and maybe even expose him for who he really was. As midnight approached, the farmhouse was quiet except for the crackle of the dying fire and the occasional groan of timbers expanding in the cold. Mark had long since dozed off in a chair, a blanket pulled tight around him, while June continued poring over files. Outside, a crescent moon cast silvered light across the fields, making the barren trees seem like watchful sentinels. Just when she was about to power down her laptop, an email arrived from Dr. Hector Kim. June, call me ASAP. I've intercepted chatter suggesting Philip is in deeper than we thought. Her nerves prickled. She glanced at Mark, peacefully unaware, and quietly stepped out onto the porch to make the call. The cold air was biting, her breath forming plumes in the moonlight. Hector answered on the first ring. His voice was grave. I've got reliable intel that Philip may be dealing with a clandestine investment group that dabbles in crypto scams and pump and dump schemes. If that's true, he's not just hiding money, he could be orchestrating fraud on a massive scale. June clenched her free hand around the wooden porch railing. God, Hector! This is bigger than I ever imagined. We found evidence of laundering, but nothing about crypto. Do you have proof? Hector hesitated. Not solid proof, just leads. But I can confirm a suspicious pattern, large crypto transactions funneling through an offshore node that's repeatedly flagged by compliance watchdogs. I suspect it ties back to Harrow Capital. I'm not sure you can handle this alone. She sighed, exhaling a cloud of fog into the night. I'm not alone. I have Georgia, my lawyer Stella, my son Mark. But you're right, this might require a bigger net. Part of her wanted to rush to the authorities with this new information, but she recognized the pitfalls of half-baked accusations. If Philip learned they were on to him, he'd bury the evidence deeper or accelerate his smear campaign against her. Let me talk to my lawyer. We'll figure out how to introduce this carefully. A distant rustle in the nearby bushes startled her. She peered into the darkness, heart pounding. Probably just a deer or raccoon, she told herself. Still, the encounter fueled her paranoia. What if Philip had already sent someone to watch the farmhouse, wrapping up the call with Hector? She re-entered the house, bolting the door behind her. She double-checked the windows, the locks, the curtains, each precaution a small stand against an unseen threat. Finally, she settled on the couch, exhausted to her core. Sleep beckoned, yet her mind churned with possibilities and dangers. The hearing loomed, only 2 days away. In that short time, she needed to finalize her affidavit, gather witness statements, and figure out how, if at all, to incorporate Hector's intel into her defense. The sheer scope of Philip's wrongdoing was staggering, and exposing it might not only free her from his manipulations, but also bring down a network of financial criminals. In her half-awake haze, she thought about the father who once taught her to question every line in a ledger, to verify every figure. That lesson had shaped her, whether she knew it or not. Thank you, Dad, she thought silently. As her eyelids grew heavy, she drifted off, buoyed by a solemn resolve that she would see this through, even if it meant tearing down the entire empire Philip had spent a lifetime constructing. Morning arrived with a pale sun peeking through cloudy skies. An uneasy quiet pervaded the farmhouse as Mark and June prepared for the day's tasks. After a quick breakfast toast and instant coffee, they drove to the small notary office in a neighboring town. The office was tucked between a thrift store and a bakery, its window advertising legal services, fax, and passport photos. An older man, balding and a bit stooped, greeted them with a polite nod. June carefully presented the document Stella had emailed her personal statement reaffirming her mental soundness, her role in coding the early Harrow Capital systems, and the intellectual property rights she never relinquished. Each page bore her signature. Mark also signed as a witness to her mental competence, describing how she'd functioned perfectly well under stress. The notary scanned each page with methodical precision, stamping and sealing as required by state law. Stepping back into the car with the freshly notarized packet, June felt a small surge of confidence. This was tangible evidence that contradicted Philip's narrative of her instability. She imagined Philip's reaction when he saw her legal pushback, the narrowing of his eyes, the clench of his jaw. The man never did handle challenges gracefully. With the affidavit secured, they made a detour to the post office, mailing duplicates to Stella and Georgia via certified mail. June also sent another copy to a P.O. box she rented in a distant county, a fallback measure if something happened to the others. As they left, Mark's phone buzzed with a text. He turned it on briefly for updates. "It's Dad," he said, glancing at the screen. "He wants to know if I've heard from you." June tensed. Ignore it or respond vaguely. Let him think you're still on campus. The less he knows about our location, the better. Mark nodded, texting back a simple "I'm studying. Dad. Not sure what's up with Mom." Midway through their drive back, June's phone rang. She checked the caller ID unknown number. Her stomach flipped. Could be another ambush from Philip's legal team, but she answered anyway. A woman's voice. "Mrs. Harrow. This is Cynthia Langford, a journalist from the Financial Tribune. I'm hoping to get a statement from you regarding the rumors about Harrow Capital's restructuring and your sudden departure from the penthouse." June glanced at Mark. Journalist? Could be a trap or an opportunity. Taking a breath, she played it cool. "I have no comment at this time." Cynthia pressed on. "Sources suggest there's discord. I'm running a piece about female entrepreneurs overshadowed by powerful spouses. I've heard you contributed significantly to Harrow Capital's tech development. If you want your side of the story told," June cut her off, politely but firmly. "I'm not ready to speak on the record. Thank you." She ended the call, heart pounding. The media had caught the scent of scandal. Timing was everything. She couldn't afford a misstep that might jeopardize the upcoming hearing. Back at the farmhouse, she found a voicemail from Stella waiting. "We have a potential hearing date for tomorrow afternoon, not 3 days from now. They're expediting. I need you in the city by noon tomorrow." June's pulse quickened. So little time left. She relayed the update to Mark, who set his jaw. "Then we drive first thing in the morning. I'll be right there with you, no matter what Philip tries." The weight of the ticking clock pressed down on them. Tomorrow, June would stand face to face with Philip in court, the man who'd meticulously locked her out of her own home and labeled her unstable. Part of her dreaded it, but another part burned with fierce anticipation. "Let him see who I really am," she thought, and realized too late that I'm not so easily erased. Night descended with a wintry drizzle, turning the farmhouse windows into mirrors of rain-streaked reflections. June paced the living room, flipping through a portfolio of printouts and scribbled notes, mentally rehearsing how she'd respond to Philip's accusations in court. Mark tried to calm her. "We've got evidence. We've got Stella. And Georgia is on standby if anything goes sideways. It'll be fine." She wanted to believe him, But years of living under Philip's strategic manipulations had taught her how cunning he could be. Just as she began to settle, her phone vibrated with a call from Georgia. June answered immediately. Georgia's voice came through, hushed but intense. June, I have new intel. I cross-referenced those shell accounts with Hector's crypto suspicions. Everything points to a crucial link in account named Blue Crest, which might be the linchpin in Philip's entire scheme. If we can prove Blue Crest is owned by Harrow Capital or Philip personally, it ties him directly to illegal crypto operations. June's heart thudded. So we can corner him with this, right? Georgia paused. Potentially, yes. But revealing it too early might let him bury the connection or claim it's a rogue division. Timing is key. My gut says wait until after the hearing to see if he tries to blindside you with more false allegations. If he does, we unleash this bombshell in a supplemental filing or leak it to the authorities. Outside, the wind picked up, howling against the old wooden boards. Mark joined June, listening in. Understood, June said. We'll keep Blue Crest on ice until the right moment. She ended the call, fighting a swirl of relief and anxiety. They had a decisive ace up their sleeve, but the hearing was mere hours away. And if she failed there, Philip could seize even more power over her life. She plopped down onto the worn couch beside Mark. He pulled up a family photo on his phone, taken about 10 years ago at Disneyland, Philip smiling broadly, an arm around each of them. The memory struck June like a physical blow. He used to act like we were the perfect team, she murmured, sorrow creeping into her voice. I wonder if any of that was real. Mark looked at the photo, then at her. Maybe some parts were real, but people change, or they show their true colors. His tone turned resolute. But I won't let him do this to you. Not without a fight. Their conversation drifted into quiet support, mother and son leaning on each other in the warm glow of the fireplace. Around midnight, June set multiple alarms on her phone. She would wake early, go through her evidence once more, then they'd drive back to the city. The courthouse was a stark arena for such personal warfare, but she had no choice. She had to prove she wasn't the unstable spouse Philip painted her as, and maybe, just maybe, she'd start unmasking the monstrous empire that lurked beneath Harrow Capital's polished facade. With Mark's hand clasped in hers and the faintest light of hope flickering inside, she allowed herself a few hours of restless sleep, steeling her mind and heart for the legal battle that awaited at dawn. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Hudson Valley as June roused Mark from a shallow sleep. They hurriedly packed their documents and clothing into the trunk of her rental car, checking the farmhouse one last time for any overlooked evidence. The weight of the approaching court hearing pressed on June's chest, a palpable reminder that within hours she'd face Philip's legal assault head-on. Her mind raced with the potential angles he might exploit. Despite her careful assembly of affidavits, witness statements, and forensic data, the simplest lie could still turn the tide against her if she wasn't vigilant. Halfway down the country road, Mark fiddled with the radio, searching for news on Harrow Capital. The reception crackled in and out, but eventually a broadcast came through Stockwatcher's report Harrow Capital's shares remained volatile amid rumors of internal discord. CEO Philip Harrow was not available for comment. The anchor moved on to other headlines, but the tension in the car lingered. Mark cast his mother a sidelong glance. We've got to get there before he makes his next move. If he tries another last-minute legal trick, we need time to respond. June nodded, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. At a gas station just off the interstate, she paused to send a text to her lawyer Stella, letting her know they were en route. Stella's reply was almost immediate. Philip's team arrived early. They're pushing to start proceedings at 1 p.m. sharp, Don't be late. June's stomach twisted at the implication that Philip was eager to blindside her as soon as possible. His menacing confidence reverberated through every action he took. They drove the rest of the way in tense silence, each lost in private worries. Mark tapped intermittently on his phone, possibly checking messages from his father, but he didn't share any new developments. June, for her part, rehearsed how she would answer questions about her mental state. Stay calm, she reminded herself. Don't let them provoke an outburst. Her phone buzzed again this time. Georgia was calling. Slipping on a headset, June answered quietly. I've got a quick update, Georgia said. I managed to link more of Philip's shell accounts to the one Hector flagged. Blue Crest. It's a definite match. He's using it to funnel money in and out of crypto positions under fake client accounts. If you need it, I can send an updated file to Stella right now. Yes, do it, June responded. But have Stella hold off on revealing it until she sees what angle Philip's lawyers use. No sense in wasting ammunition if they don't bring up finances directly. She ended the call, her pulse thrumming. With each piece of evidence, the noose tightened around Philip's schemes. Yet if she played her hand too soon, he could slip free by claiming ignorance or blaming subordinates. They reached Manhattan an hour before the hearing, navigating traffic to the courthouse's underground parking. The city's towering skyline and hurried passers-by made June oddly nostalgic. She recalled a time when she and Philip walked these same streets as equals dreamers, building a future together. Pushing those sentimental memories aside, she forced herself to focus. She was about to enter a legal battlefield, and sentiment had no place there. Yes, goal. The courthouse lobby was bustling with lawyers toting leather briefcases, families awaiting custody hearings, and officials barking instructions. June kept her head high as she passed through security. Mark followed close behind, casting uneasy glances at the throngs of people. For him, this was a front row seat to the machinery of high-stakes litigation, a world he'd never thought his family would inhabit. They met Stella Harding just beyond the metal detectors. The petite lawyer had her hair tightly pinned, and her expression was a blend of urgency and confidence. We're on the docket in courtroom 6, she announced. Philip's counsel tried to shift us to an earlier slot, but the judge said 1 o'clock is final. We have maybe 20 minutes to prep. Stella's voice dropped lower. Have you heard any new stunts from Philip? June shook her head. Nothing beyond the usual intimidation attempts. But we have new evidence from Georgia. Ready to deploy if needed. She kept her voice firm, though her stomach nodded. Stella's gaze flickered toward Mark. We may need your testimony, young man. Are you up for that? Mark nodded resolutely, jaw tight. I'll do whatever it takes to show the court she's not mentally unstable. She raised me. She taught me how to think critically. This accusation is baseless. A slight tremor in his voice betrayed his anger, but he pushed it down. Stella guided them to a small conference room off the hallway. Inside, they found Georgia waiting, hunched over a laptop. I made it, though I wish I had more time to finalize my analytics. Georgia murmured, but I can explain the gist if we need to, as they reviewed last-minute details. June glanced at the clock on the wall, T minus 15 minutes. She took a steadying breath and placed a hand on Georgia's shoulder. Thank you for being here, she said quietly. You're risking a lot, especially if Philip finds a way to retaliate. Georgia waved it off. I've faced worse. Trust me. Let's focus on you. Meanwhile, Stella rapidly texted on her phone, presumably coordinating with staffers or verifying that certain documents reached the judge's clerk. Mark looked between them all, a swirl of admiration and fear on his face. So we go in and basically say, we're not insane, you are. Is that the plan? A reluctant chuckle passed through the small group. June exhaled. We'll be more subtle than that. But yes, effectively, we have to prove that I am fully competent and that Philip has been orchestrating a narrative. If the judge sees he's lying about my mental health, it might raise doubts about his entire approach. Stella nodded. Exactly. And if the judge does open a broader inquiry into finances, we'll be ready with Georgia's data. She motioned to her watch. We need to head upstairs. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. June felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment she'd either reclaim her agency in the eyes of the court or watch Philip tighten his stranglehold, bolstered by the presence of her allies. She squared her shoulders. "Let's go," she said, voice resolute. The time for fear was past. Now was the time to stand in the light and refuse to be silenced. They stepped into a hushed, wood-paneled courtroom. Row upon row of polished benches faced the judge's bench, with a center aisle leading to two tables, one for June, one for Philip. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Honorable Diane Rosenthal, was already in her seat, flipping through papers with quick, practiced efficiency. Her short salt and pepper hair and no-nonsense demeanor suggested someone who did not suffer fools. June's heart lurched when she spotted Philip at the opposing table, flanked by a tall, silver-haired attorney, Malcolm Reeves, if she remembered correctly. Philip met her gaze with an inscrutable look, then turned to whisper something to Reeves. The older man nodded and smoothed his immaculate pinstripe suit, eyeing June with thinly veiled condescension. Stella nudged June forward, and they took their positions at their own table. Mark and Georgia slid into the first bench behind them, ready if called to testify. The bailiff announced the case in a clear voice, Harrow v. Harrow, regarding claims of mental unfitness and financial conservatorship. June clenched her fist under the table, the legal formalities sending a chill through her. This is real, she told herself. We're truly at war. Judge Rosenthal lifted her gaze. Let's begin with the petitioner, Mr. Reeves. You're representing Mr. Harrow. Reeves stood, nodding. Yes, Your Honor. We are here to address the critical concern that Mrs. Harrow's recent erratic actions suggest she cannot competently manage her financial or personal affairs. He spoke in a calm, measured tone that implied a heavy gravitas. We have affidavits from staff members witnessing her sudden mood swings and delusional accusations. June felt heat rise in her cheeks. Delusional accusations. She fought the urge to interject. Better to let Stella handle this. Stella rose, adjusting her blazer. Your Honor, we refute these claims in the strongest terms. My client, Mrs. June Harrow, has prepared evidence of her mental soundness, including notarized affidavits from reputable professionals. Furthermore, we can demonstrate Mr. Harrow's motive for making these claims to conceal his own financial misconduct. A ripple of reaction went through the courtroom. Philip stiffened at the word misconduct, but Reeves maintained a poker face. The judge tapped her pen, eyes narrowing. Let me see if I understand. Mrs. Harrow is alleging that Mr. Harrow's petition is not in good faith, but rather a strategic move to hide questionable financial dealings. Stella nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We're prepared to submit documentation supporting that argument. A moment of tense silence followed, and June watched as the judge's expression shifted into something resembling curiosity or suspicion. Reeves cleared his throat. This is preposterous. My client has been nothing but transparent in his finances. This hearing is about Mrs. Harrow's competence, not an inquisition into the entire Harrow capital empire. He shot Stella a pointed glare. We should remain focused on the reason we're here, her erratic behavior and potential psychological instability. June bit back a retort. Stella stepped in. Her so-called instability is a fabrication. Your Honor, I request permission to call a witness, Dr. Georgia Williams, a cybersecurity expert who has worked closely with Mrs. Harrow. She can testify to my client's mental clarity. After a moment's consideration, Judge Rosenthal nodded. Granted. June exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was their first move, a measured one, but crucial. The opening gambits were in motion, and the stakes felt impossibly high. Georgia rose from the bench, smoothing her blazer as she approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, she settled into the wooden chair, clasping her hands in her lap. Stella began the questioning in a calm, direct style, designed to highlight Georgia's professional credentials. Dr. Williams, could you state your background for the record? Georgia cleared her throat. I have a PhD in computer science from MIT, and I specialize in cybersecurity and data analytics. I co-founded a company named ByteShield in the late 90s and have worked as a consultant to various technology firms and financial institutions. Stella nodded, glancing at the judge, who scribbled notes. And how do you know Mrs. June Harrow? We've been friends and colleagues for years. We collaborated on encryption software in the early days of the tech boom, and more recently, I've assisted her in analyzing certain financial data. Stella took a slight step forward. In your interactions with Mrs. Harrow, have you ever observed behavior that would suggest mental instability or incompetence in handling complex tasks? Georgia's gaze flickered to June, her tone resolute. Absolutely not. She's demonstrated meticulous attention to detail and strategic thinking, particularly under stress. She's one of the most level-headed individuals I know in a crisis. Reeves stood abruptly, signaling his intention to cross-examine. The judge waved Stella to step back. Approaching Georgia, Reeves donned a sympathetic expression that June recognized as a tactic. Dr. Williams, you say Mrs. Harrow is level-headed. Are you aware of an incident 2 weeks ago in which she allegedly locked herself in a bathroom for over an hour, claiming someone was spying on her? June stiffened. That was a fabrication. She'd never done such a thing. She glanced at Stella, who frowned, seemingly caught off guard. Georgia raised an eyebrow. I'm not aware of any such incident. It sounds like gossip or a misunderstanding. Or, more likely, it never happened. Reeves let out a small, condescending chuckle. So you can't confirm or deny it. Georgia held her ground. I can deny it if it's false, and I believe it is. To my knowledge, June has never exhibited paranoid behavior like that. Reeves turned to the judge, shrugging theatrically. Your Honor, it seems we have conflicting accounts. We'll present more details later. For now, I have no further questions. He sat down, a smug curve on his lips. June tried to remain calm, reminding herself that Reeves's skill lay in sowing doubt. Judge Rosenthal cleared her throat. Dr. Williams, you're excused for now. Ms. Harding, any additional witnesses? Stella nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Mr. Mark Harrow. A new wave of tension swept through June's body. Mark was about to stand in open court, testifying effectively against his own father. She watched him rise, straighten his shirt, and approach the stand. Pride and apprehension churned in her gut. This would be crucial if Reeves managed to twist Mark's words. It could damage June's case irreparably. As Mark raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, June locked eyes with him. This young man, her son, her anchor, was about to challenge his father's narrative in a public forum. She silently willed him strength. Judge Rosenthal indicated for Stella to proceed, and June noted the fleeting look of alarm on Philip's face across the aisle. Ay, kies. He wasn't expecting Mark to speak against him. She thought the real battle was about to intensify. Stella approached the witness stand with a reassuring nod. Mark, visibly nervous, glanced at his mother for a brief second before fixing his gaze on Stella. She began gently, "Mark, how old are you, and what is your relationship to the parties in this case?" He cleared his throat. "I'm 22, currently a college senior, and June Harrow is my mother. Philip Harrow is my father." His voice sounded steady, despite the tension. Stella offered a small smile. "Have you observed any signs of mental instability in your mother behavior that might justify this legal action?" Mark took a measured breath. "Not at all. My mom is capable, alert, and rational. She's the one who taught me logical thinking, problem solving. She's the reason I chose to study engineering." June felt warmth blossom in her chest. "Thank you." "Mark," she thought silently. Stella continued, "Has she confided in you regarding the circumstances of her abrupt departure from the family home?" "Yes," Mark replied. "She told me she was locked out, that her access to finances was cut off without warning. She explained how she discovered questionable financial transfers at Harrow Capital. My father wouldn't address them, and instead, he started claiming she was—" He paused, swallowing hard, unhinged. "But anyone who knows her sees that's not true." Nodding, Stella said, "Thank you, Mark. No further questions." She turned to Reeves, "Your witness." A tense hush settled as Reeves stood, buttoning his suit jacket. He approached Mark with calculated gravitas, eyes narrowed. "So, Mark, you're a college student financially supported by Mr. Harrow, correct?" Mark shifted. "He pays part of my tuition. My mom contributes too." Reeves circled like a hawk. "But you describe your father as the primary breadwinner." "Yes." Mark frowned. "Historically, maybe, but that doesn't change the facts about my mom's competence." Reeves feigned a look of pity. "I understand you want to defend your mother. However, have you considered that your father might have your best interests at heart, especially if he believes your mother is making paranoid accusations?" Mark bristled. "My best interests?" "He's the one who locked her out. He didn't try to have a civilized conversation. He attacked her character. That's not exactly paternal concern." From the corner of her eye, June saw Philip stiffen. Reeves pressed on. "You mentioned questionable financial transfers. Do you have any formal expertise in finance to identify wrongdoing? Or are you just echoing your mother's accusations?" Mark sat up straighter. "I'm not a financial expert, but I have eyes. I saw the record's large sums shuffling between offshore accounts. It looks bad. And if my father wanted to clarify it, he should have done so, not tried to brand Mom as crazy." Reeves's jaw tensed. "So you're basing your testimony on incomplete information." "Understood." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I see no further value in this line of questioning." "Stepping back," Reeves murmured. "No more questions for this witness." Judge Rosenthal folded her hands, gaze flicking between Mark and Philip. "Very well, Mr. Harrow. If you or Mr. Reeves intend to provide direct testimony about the mental fitness claim, we can proceed." In that moment, Philip rose. June felt her heart lurch. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to speak," he announced. The judge nodded. "Approach the stand." June watched as her husband strode forward, every bit the confident CEO who once dazzled rooms full of investors. This time, though, she sensed desperation beneath his polished veneer. The next few minutes would reveal if he could convincingly spin a narrative of her instability, or if the undercurrents of truth would break through. Either way, the stage was set for a final confrontation between the life she'd known and the reality she'd uncovered. Philip took the oath and sat in the witness chair, smoothing his expensive tie. June noticed a flicker of tension in the line of his jaw, an imperfection in his usually impeccable composure. Reeves initiated the questioning with a friendly tone. as if talking to an old colleague. Mr. Harrow, can you describe why you believe your wife, Mrs. June Harrow, is currently unfit to manage her finances and personal affairs? With a measured sigh, Philip spoke. I've loved June for nearly 3 decades. We built a life together, but over the last year, I've witnessed alarming changes in her. She grew paranoid, accusing me of deceit whenever I traveled for business. She'd lock herself in rooms, rant about conspiracies in the financial world. I became concerned for her mental well-being. June's teeth clenched. Lock herself in rooms. That was entirely fabricated. She forced herself to remain composed, recalling Stella's advice. Let him talk. We'll dismantle his lies point by point. Next to her, Mark looked incensed, but she pressed a calming hand on his arm. Reeves continued. So these weren't one-time incidents. Philip shook his head solemnly. No, they escalated. The night she left the penthouse, she threatened to expose me if I didn't hand over all our financial records. She was erratic, so I asked security to escort her out for her own safety, ensuring she didn't do something harmful to herself or others. June almost choked on disbelief. The judge's expression remained neutral, but Stella whispered, "We'll cross-examine. Stay steady." Reeves offered a sympathetic nod to Philip. That must have been difficult for you. Did you make any attempt to get her professional help? Philip nodded. I suggested therapy, but she refused, claiming I was the problem. I only filed for conservatorship because I feared she'd sabotage her own financial stability. I never wanted it to come to this. When Reeves finished, Stella stood, voice razor sharp. Mr. Harrow, you claim Mrs. Harrow locked herself away and made threats. Did you document these incidents, contact a mental health professional, a hospital, or even the police? Philip hesitated. Not at the time. I hoped to handle it privately. We're a prominent family, and I didn't want to damage her reputation if it was just stress. Stella arched a brow. So there's no formal record of these supposed breakdowns. Philip shifted in his seat. No official reports? No, but personal testimony from staff. Stella pounced. Staff who depend on you for their salaries. A flicker of annoyance crossed Philip's face. I would hope they'd tell the truth, regardless of employment. Stella pressed on. Let's talk finances. You claim June was paranoid about your business dealings. Do you deny that Harrow Capital uses offshore accounts and shell corporations? Philip's jaw tightened. No, large firms have legitimate offshore structures for tax efficiency. That's standard practice at our level. This is not about finances, but it is about finances. Stella interrupted coolly. You're seeking full control of marital assets, effectively leaving Mrs. Harrow with none. Isn't that so? Philip's voice grew colder. I'm seeking to protect her from catastrophic financial mistakes. Stella gave a half smile. Right. And I assume the millions flowing to cryptic accounts is also to protect her. Reeves objected, claiming irrelevance, but the judge allowed Stella to continue a bit further. June watched Philip squirm at the mention of cryptic accounts. He maintained a show of indignation, but she recognized a flicker of genuine fear. Stella hammered one more nail. So if we audited these offshore accounts you claim are legitimate, we'd see nothing linking you personally to illegal activity or undisclosed funds. Philip met her gaze with steeled confidence. Correct. There's nothing illegal. A hush settled. Stella stepped back, satisfied for the moment. Judge Rosenthal announced a recess for lunch, instructing all parties to reconvene in an hour to address final arguments. As June gathered her papers, she locked eyes with Philip. He held her stare with chilling composure, but a muscle twitched at his temple. He knows we're on to him, she thought. The question was, would he double down on the lie or crack under real scrutiny? The corridor outside the courtroom thrummed with tension as lawyers and litigants shuffled to and fro. June found a quiet bench near a window overlooking a snowy courtyard. Mark joined her, exhaling frustration. He's lying through his teeth. How can the judge not see it? June patted his hand. We haven't presented our full financial evidence yet. Stella just poked a hole or two. The real assault on his story comes next. She glanced around. Where's Stella and Georgia? He nodded toward the far end of the corridor, where Stella was on a phone call and Georgia was huddled over her laptop, probably refining the strategy. We only have an hour. Just then, a voice made them both turn. June? It was Philip, standing a few feet away with Malcolm Reeves, who hovered like a bodyguard. Mark shot up defensively, but June raised a hand, signaling him to stand down. She eyed Philip warily. What do you want, Philip? He glanced at Reeves, then back at her, lowering his voice. We don't have to continue this public spectacle. Let's resolve it amicably. You step back from these outlandish accusations, and I'll withdraw the conservatorship petition. We can settle out of court. June's anger flared, but she kept her expression neutral. Settle out of court on what terms? Philip shrugged, voice smooth as silk. You keep a comfortable stipend, remain silent about offshore matters, and we both move on. No one gets dragged through mud. She felt Mark stiffen beside her. Her mind flashed to the labyrinth of shell accounts, the stolen millions, the threat of criminal charges. He wants me to vanish with hush money. She shook her head slowly. No, Philip, I won't be bought off. This isn't just about money, it's about the truth. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. Stop being naive. Even if you prove something, the fallout will consume you. Our son will be caught in the middle. Is that what you want? His gaze flicked to Mark, who glowered but stayed silent. June squared her shoulders. I want accountability, and I want to live without fear of you labeling me unstable whenever I question your secrets. She glanced at Reeves, who looked impatient, checking his watch. If you had any respect left for me, you'd admit this is about preserving your empire, not my mental health. Philip's face darkened. You'll regret turning me down. Then he turned on his heel and strode off. Reeves trailing behind. Mark let out a shaky breath. He basically threatened you. She squeezed his hand. He's desperate. That's good for us. A moment later, Stella and Georgia approached. Stella frowned. I saw him talking to you. Everything okay? June nodded, relaying the offer. Georgia snorted. Classic hush money tactic. We're close to something he doesn't want public. Let's not give him an inch. They spent the remainder of the recess huddled together, finalizing the strategy for the next session. Stella planned to introduce direct evidence of financial misconduct if the judge allowed it. The key was establishing that Philip's claim of mental unfitness stemmed from a desire to silence June about his illicit dealings. All too soon, a court officer announced the recess was over. They stood and stretched, nerves on edge. Mark tucked an arm around his mother. Whatever happens in there, I'm proud of you, he whispered. June's throat tightened, emotion welling. Thank you, she managed. With that, they returned to the courtroom, determined to lay bare the truth, even if it meant burning the last bridges to the life June once believed she shared with Philip Harrow. Once everyone was reassembled, Judge Rosenthal wasted no time. All right, counsel, I understand we have concluding arguments. Ms. Harding, you first. Stella rose, stepping toward the bench with a thin stack of documents in hand. Your Honor, We submit that the entire premise of Mrs. Harrow's alleged mental instability is a ploy orchestrated by Mr. Harrow to consolidate control over marital assets and stifle any scrutiny of his financial operations. We have compiled evidence indicating off-the-books transfers to multiple shell companies, including one named Bluecrest, which strongly suggests illegal activity. A hushed stir ran through the courtroom. Reeves immediately objected, claiming the argument was outside the scope of the hearing. But Judge Rosenthal overruled him with a raised hand. This hearing may have begun as a matter of mental fitness, but if the respondent presents credible evidence that the petition is in bad faith, it becomes relevant, Stella continued, confidence growing. Thank you, Your Honor. We have data from recognized experts Dr. Georgia Williams and an economist, Dr. Hector Kim, revealing a pattern of transfers consistent with money laundering. By portraying Mrs. Harrow as delusional, Mr. Harrow attempts to discredit her testimony, thus shielding himself. We request the court deny the conservatorship petition and order a more thorough financial inquiry. June breathed a quiet sigh of relief as Stella deftly summarized their position. She glanced at Mark, who nodded in silent support. The judge looked to Reeves. Mr. Reeves, your final argument. Reeves marched to the podium, exuding righteous indignation. Your Honor, this is a sideshow meant to deflect from the real issue, Mrs. Harrow's mental competence. Mr. Harrow has responsibly managed the family's wealth for decades. If these were legitimate allegations, they would be raised in a separate financial lawsuit or through proper authorities. Instead, we have a smear campaign orchestrated by a paranoid spouse. We stand by the petition for conservatorship. He concluded with a dramatic flourish. Our evidence of her erratic behavior is substantial, and these so-called shell company theories hold no water without formal forensic accounting. We ask the court to protect Mr. Harrow's rightful interests and, more importantly, protect Mrs. Harrow from her own destructive impulses. Judge Rosenthal leaned back, temple throbbing. All right, I will review the submissions and hear any brief rebuttals. Then I'll make my determination regarding Mrs. Harrow's mental fitness and whether any further inquiry is justified. Her gaze swept the room, pausing on June, then on Philip. Both sides have presented starkly opposing narratives. I need a moment to consider if there's enough basis to suspect ulterior motives on Mr. Harrow's part. With a rap of her gavel, the judge declared a short recess to deliberate privately. The courtroom buzzed as people stood or murmured anxiously. June sat in place, blood pounding in her ears. Stella placed a hand on her shoulder. We did what we could. Now it's up to the judge. Philip shot them a cold, silent stare from across the aisle. He looked rattled, though he tried to mask it behind a mask of calm. Reeves was whispering in his ear, presumably reassuring him that June's revelations wouldn't hold. In the gallery, Mark and Georgia were deep in whispered conversation, possibly brainstorming next steps if the judge ruled against them. June forced herself to inhale deeply, remembering the countless lines of code she'd once debugged, how each flaw had to be exposed with methodical persistence. That's what we're doing here, she told herself, exposing the flawed architecture of Philip's scheme. Whether or not the judge saw it clearly today, she would not rest until the truth was undeniable. Minutes stretched like hours until the bailiff called the room to order again. Judge Rosenthal returned, her expression unreadable. Be seated, she commanded. I have made my preliminary ruling. June braced herself, hoping her pounding heart wouldn't drown out the judge's words. The tension was near suffocating as Judge Rosenthal adjusted her glasses. Her gaze flicked from June to Philip. Then she spoke in measured tones that carried the weight of authority. In the matter of Mr. Harrow's petition claiming Mrs. Harrow's mental unfitness, I do not find the evidence provided by Mr. Harrow sufficiently compelling to grant conservatorship. The affidavits from staff are not corroborated by medical records or documented incidents. Conversely, Mrs. Harrow presents multiple attestations to her competence, including testimony from Dr. Williams and her son, Mark Harrow, as well as her own notarized statements. A wave of relief coursed through June. She nearly sagged in her seat, tears threatening to well. Mark squeezed her hand, and Stella allowed herself a faint smile. Judge Rosenthal wasn't finished, though, regarding Mrs. Harrow's claim that this petition is a stratagem to hide potentially illicit financial dealings. I see enough plausible indication to warrant further investigation in a separate legal venue. Specifically, I invite Mrs. Harrow to file an official motion if she wishes to pursue the matter. For now, I will not impose conservatorship, and the court strongly advises both parties to maintain status quo until all financial questions are resolved. Reeves stood, flustered. Your Honor, we object to any insinuation. The judge cut him off briskly. This is not a finding of wrongdoing. Mr. Reeves, it is merely an acknowledgement that the documents Mrs. Harrow provided raise questions. If you believe these allegations are baseless, you can demonstrate so in the appropriate forum. This hearing is concluded. She slammed the gavel, and just like that, it was over. A mix of triumph and lingering anxiety flooded June, and beyond. She had won the immediate battle, no conservatorship, no official condemnation of her mental health, yet the war for justice was far from finished. She turned to Stella, who nodded in understanding. We'll file the motions about his finances. This gives us leverage. Philip was already pushing past them, face thunderous. He muttered something to Reeves, who followed him, trying to placate him. June caught only fragments of phrases like appeal and drag her through the mud. Mark glared at his father's retreating back, but said nothing. Georgia joined them. Relief etched on her face. He can't muzzle you now. That's a start. They exited the courtroom, stepping into the corridor where a small crowd of onlookers parted for them. A reporter hovered, microphone outstretched. Mrs. Harrow, any comment on your victory against Mr. Harrow's petition? June tensed, not wanting to give a soundbite that Philip could twist. Stella cut in. No comment at this time. Thank you. The reporter persisted, but they walked on, determined to keep a low profile until the next phase of their plan was secure. Once they reached the building's lobby, June finally allowed herself to smile a small, weary smile, but genuine. Mark hugged her tight. You did it, Mom. He can't just label you crazy and take everything. She inhaled the moment, the swirl of relief and the lingering dread that more battles loomed. But at least she had her name and her agency intact. Stella checked her watch. We should celebrate, but not for long. Let's get back to my office to discuss how to proceed with the financial case. If we strike while the iron's hot, we can move swiftly before Philip shores up his defenses. Georgia agreed, slipping on her coat. Give me an hour with those new logs from Hector, and I'll have a blueprint for the next assault. June felt a deep, simmering resolution. They had survived Philip's attempt to obliterate her autonomy. Now it was time to go on the offensive. She glanced at Mark, who offered a determined grin. We're in this together, his eyes seemed to say. And for the first time in years, June believed they had a real chance at not just surviving, but triumphing in the face of Philip's empire. They arrived at Stella's law office, a modest suite on the second floor of a brick building on the outskirts of Manhattan. The waiting area was quiet, a reprieve from the courthouse chaos. Stella ushered them into a conference room lined with shelves of legal tomes. Georgia and Mark settled into chairs at the round table, while June took a moment to gather her thoughts. Stella began briskly. The judge's refusal to grant conservatorship is a major win, but Philip won't sit idle. He might appeal or shift tactics, possibly draining accounts or forging new documentation. We need to file a petition to freeze certain assets during the investigation. June nodded. How fast can we do that? Stella tapped a pen on her legal pad. I can draft the motion by tomorrow morning. It'll ask the court to impose a temporary restraining order on key Harrow Capital accounts, especially the ones we suspect of harboring illicit funds. Georgia opened her laptop, pushing it to the center of the table. I mapped out some urgent steps. We have to identify which banks hold the suspected shell accounts, Blue Crest, and others. Then we present that to the court with enough evidence to justify immediate action. If we wait too long, Philip might move everything again. Mark leaned forward, eyebrows knit in concentration. How do we ensure the court listens? He'll argue we're interfering with a legitimate business. Stella offered a grim smile. If we show probable cause like repeated suspicious transfers to known offshore havens, that can be enough. The judge doesn't need proof of criminal guilt, just a reasonable basis to freeze assets. June drummed her fingers on the table, recalling the day she discovered the cryptic references in Harrow Capital's ledgers. I have an external drive with the raw data from the farmhouse. Let me grab it. She rummaged through her bag until she found the small USB, handing it to Georgia. This has everything from that night. Some is duplicative, but cross-check to ensure we're not missing anything. Georgia plugged it in, skimming files. Yes, a lot of this lines up with Hector's analysis. We'll highlight the clearest red flags, massive transfers just before quarterly reports. Identical amounts labeled as consultancy fees for non-existent firms. She paused, glancing at June. You realize if we do this, we're going all in? Philip might retaliate. A pang of apprehension darted through June, but she steeled herself. He already tried to have me declared incompetent. I can't live in fear. Let him retaliate if he must. I'm finished being his victim. Mark patted her shoulder in silent solidarity. Stella rose, carrying a stack of folders to her desk. We'll work all evening if necessary. I'll have my paralegal deliver the motion first thing tomorrow. Once we file, we'll notify Harrow Capital's attorneys to ensure they can respond, but we'll request a hearing ASAP. The goal is to get a freeze order within days. June gazed out the window at the gray Manhattan skyline, a swirl of emotions roiling in her chest. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a willingness to confront Philip's monstrous web of deceit. Yet the lingering question loomed, would exposing his wrongdoing come at a steep personal cost? She turned back to the group, seeing mirrors of her own determination in their faces. If so, let it. Freedom and truth were worth the risk. Night had fallen by the time they wrapped up at Stella's office. Nassau. George's eyes were bloodshot from hours of data cross-referencing, and Mark kept massaging his temples, the tension of the day catching up with him. June felt exhaustion tugging at her bones, but the urgency of their mission kept her mind buzzing. They decided to stay in a nearby hotel rather than risk returning to the penthouse or the farmhouse. June insisted on paying for 2 adjacent rooms, one for her and Mark, another for Georgia, though Stella said she'd foot the bill if needed. No, June said firmly, handing over a card tied to her personal savings. He doesn't control everything. The small act of financial independence warmed her heart. In the hotel elevator, Mark leaned against the wall with a weary sigh. Mom, do you think Dad will cut me off tuition? Living expenses? Am I about to be financially stranded? She turned to him, guilt washing over her. We'll figure something out. I can't promise it'll be easy, but you won't be alone. He gave a nod of understanding. If it means standing up for you, it's worth it. I just never thought he'd become this person. His eyes glistened momentarily, but he blinked away the emotion. June recognized his heartbreak at the father he was losing. a father who might never have been the hero Mark envisioned. They parted ways at their rooms. Once inside, June kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. She let the events of the day replay in her mind: Philip's lies on the stand, the judge ruling in her favor, the promise of a deeper financial inquiry. The small fridge in the corner hummed quietly, and the city lights glowed beyond the drawn curtains. A soft knock came at the connecting door. She got up, opening it to find Georgia, hair slightly disheveled. "Can't sleep either?" Georgia asked. June shook her head. "Too wired." They sat together on the edge of the bed, sharing a bottle of water. Georgia spoke softly. "Look, you're walking a dangerous road. If Philip's money laundering scheme is as big as we suspect, he might have powerful partners, people who won't appreciate you meddling." June rubbed her arms against a sudden chill. "I know, but if I back down, I'll never forgive myself. I let him diminish me for too long now. This has become bigger than me anyway." Georgia nodded. "Just be prepared. Once we file that petition to freeze assets, the gloves come off." After Georgia left, June finally slid under the covers, phone clutched in her hand. She typed a short, cautious message to Dr. Hector Kim. "We're moving forward. Might need your official testimony soon." Then she set the phone aside, physically and emotionally drained. If she dreamed that night, she remembered nothing come morning, only a sense of suspended time, as if her mind needed a momentary blackout to reset. When the alarm buzzed at dawn, she roused stiffly, forcing herself into a lukewarm shower. Over a quick breakfast downstairs with Mark and Georgia, they reaffirmed the day's objective file, the asset freeze petition, then regroup with Stella for next steps. "We're in the final sprint," June reminded herself. "Just hold on a bit longer." She didn't realize how apt that metaphor would become, because the race was indeed nearing its final, breakneck stretch, and Philip had no intention of losing. They converged again at Stella's office. The crisp morning air had done little to clear the tension in June's chest. Still, she felt a twinge of excitement as Stella revealed the final draft of the petition. "It's all here," Stella said, flipping through pages. "We detail the suspicious transfers, reference the expert opinions, and request immediate judicial relief to prevent further dissipation of assets." June skimmed the first page. "Petition for emergency restraining order on certain Harrow Capital holdings." She glanced up. "When do we submit it?" Stella glanced at her watch. "Right now. My paralegal will electronically file it, and I'll hand-deliver a physical copy to the courthouse. I've also alerted a judge who handles financial motions. He might schedule an emergency hearing within the next 48 hours. Mark paced the room. "Will Dad see this today?" Stella nodded. "Yes, we'll serve notice to his legal team. The moment it's filed, they'll know. Expect blowback." Georgia shut her laptop. "I've done everything I can with the data. Any more digging, and we'd risk redundancy. I'll stand by for any last-minute clarifications." June took a deep breath and pressed her signature onto the designated lines, feeling both a surge of finality and a stab of anxiety. No turning back. Once Stella's paralegal whisked the documents away, they sat in subdued silence, as though they'd just launched a torpedo into unknown waters. Sure enough, within an hour, Stella's phone pinged. She glanced at the caller ID, Malcolm Reeves. With a sigh, she answered on speaker so everyone could listen. Reeves's voice bristled with fury. "Stella, what is this nonsense you just filed? You realize the damage this could cause to a legitimate company. You're playing with fire." Stella's tone was unflappable. "We're simply exercising our client's right to request judicial protection of marital assets. If your client has nothing to hide, there should be no problem." Reeves let out a bitter laugh. You're dragging Harrow Capital's name through the mud for the sake of your client's fantasies. We'll file a motion to dismiss, and we will seek sanctions for your frivolous claims. See you in court, Stella replied coolly before ending the call. Mark stared at his mother. That's it. He just threatened legal penalties. And you're okay with that? She forced a steady exhale. I have to be. They're cornered. Mark, cornered animals lash out. Georgia nodded in agreement, eyes grim. We expected this. Let them try. The evidence stands. Stella checked her phone again. The judge just scheduled an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Her eyebrows rose. That's fast. Clearly, they recognized the severity of the allegations. June's stomach fluttered with nerves. Tomorrow? That doesn't leave much time to prepare. Stella patted her shoulder. We'll be fine. We have everything in order. Now, let's decide who testifies. Likely Georgia, to explain the data's meaning, and maybe you to confirm how you obtained it. The judge might want to question Dr. Kim, but we can do that by phone if needed. Mark placed a comforting hand on June's back. I'll be there too, Mom, in case they try to spin more lies about you. She offered a small smile. This is it, she thought. We're making our stand. They spent the rest of the day rehearsing possible questions, verifying data points, and bracing for the storm. In quiet moments, June found herself wondering if there was any scenario where Philip would finally come clean, admit his wrongdoing, and spare them all more pain. But the memory of his cold eyes in court told her otherwise. He'll never yield, she realized, so we must do it for him. The next morning dawned bright and cold, a stark contrast to the dark mood threading through June's thoughts. The emergency hearing was set in a different courthouse, one that specialized in commercial and financial disputes. It lacked the grandiose columns and marble floors of the main building, opting instead for sleek steel and glass. Even from the outside, it looked like a place where corporate giants came to do battle. June, Mark, and Georgia arrived early, meeting Stella by a bank of elevators. Stella handed each a copy of the motion. Remember, she said, we're asking for a temporary restraining order on specific Harrow Capital accounts. We'll present the data as evidence of repeated suspicious transfers. She glanced at June, who smoothed a stray strand of hair. Once more into the fray. Yes. They rode the elevator in tense silence, stepping out into a corridor where lawyers in tailored suits hustled between rooms. Their hearing was in a small chamber with a single judge presiding from behind a broad mahogany desk. Judge Leonard Brantley, a wiry man in his 60s with deep-set eyes, greeted them curtly. You have half an hour before I move on to the next case. Make your points succinct. Reeves and Philip arrived moments later, looking harried. Philip's face was a stormy mask. While Reeves fumbled through stacks of paper, there wasn't even time for a formal introduction. Judge Brantley directed them to begin. Stella led off, calmly summarizing the petition. Then she called Georgia to explain the suspicious transaction patterns. Georgia used a large screen to display spreadsheets and flowcharts, describing how Harrow Capital's funds moved between a handful of shell entities like Bluecrest, Redwood Holdings, and VistaCorp. June watched Philip's expression darken with every mention of these names. When Reeves took his turn, he insisted the transactions were typical corporate structuring, claiming no wrongdoing. He cast doubt on Georgia's methodology, implying it was an amateur data dump. But Georgia held her own, citing her credentials and pointing out that legitimate transfers don't typically appear on watchdog lists for potential laundering. Judge Brantley's gaze flicked between them, scribbling notes at lightning speed. Finally, Stella called June to the stand. June recounted discovering the references in Harrow Capital's ledgers. her attempts to seek explanation, and how Philip responded by locking her out and questioning her mental health. Reeves tried to rattle her by bringing up the bathroom lock anecdote again, but June calmly denied it, referencing the judge's earlier ruling that had dismissed Philip's claims as unsubstantiated. Philip never rose to speak in his own defense. Instead, Reeves argued for him, stating that Mr. Harrow sees this hearing as an unnecessary intrusion and that further scrutiny would harm the company and investors. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the clock. By the time arguments concluded, a hush fell over the room as Judge Brantley rubbed his temples, exhaling. "All right," he said, "I see cause for concern. I'm inclined to grant a temporary freeze on the specified accounts until an independent auditor can review them. The freeze will last 30 days unless extended. Mr. Reeves, your client is welcome to provide evidence that nothing untoward is happening." A wave of relief and adrenaline rushed through June. They did it. The judge hammered out details quickly, giving both parties a copy of the order. Reeves and Phillips stood, outraged, but they could do little more than sputter objections. As they exited, Philip glared daggers at June, his lips pressed into a thin line. She met his gaze without flinching. He had wanted a war, and now he had one, except this time, she wasn't fighting alone. That afternoon found them gathered in the same conference room at Stella's office, exhaustion mixing with a heady sense of accomplishment. The judge had ordered an independent audit of Harrow Capital's relevant accounts, effectively blocking Philip from shuffling or hiding funds for at least a month. This was the break they needed. Georgia stood by the window, scrolling through her phone. "I have 3 missed calls from an unknown number, probably the press. They're sniffing out why the court froze some of Harrow Capital's assets." Mark, sprawled in a chair, rubbed his eyes. "It's going to get out soon, right? The media will spin it in who knows what direction." June was too drained to care much. Let them spin. At least the truth is creeping into the light. She turned to Stella. "What's next legally?" Stella tapped a pen on her desk. "Over the next 30 days, an auditor will comb through Harrow Capital's records. If they find the suspicious patterns we expect, Philip might face civil and possibly criminal charges. We'll also push forward with divorce proceedings if you want. He's proven beyond doubt he doesn't have your interests at heart." The word divorce cut through June, a bittersweet inevitability. She pictured the day they married her father was still alive, and the future seemed endless. Now it felt like a different lifetime. "Yes," she said softly. "I want to file. This marriage is beyond salvaging." Stella reached over to squeeze her hand. "We'll do it on your terms." Mark cleared his throat. "And me, I have a feeling Dad's going to retaliate. Probably cut off my tuition. But I stand by you. Mom, I'm not backing down." She ruffled his hair gently. "We'll make it work somehow." A pang of sadness mingled with pride. He was sacrificing security, maybe even his father's affection, but she understood it was a stance he felt compelled to take. Georgia suddenly let out a small exclamation. "Hector just emailed me." He uncovered chatter that certain high-profile investors in Harrow Capital are alarmed by the freeze. Some might pull out. Philip could lose more than just money. He could lose the entire network that's protected him. June couldn't help a wry smile. "Good. I'm done letting him hide behind illusions. If they desert him, that's on him, not me." Yet as soon as she said it, a flicker of sympathy rose in her strange after all he'd done. She quashed it. This wasn't a time for pity. They broke for a late lunch, ordering takeout and sharing a subdued meal in Stella's office. Over noodles and soup, they let the day's tension gradually ease. Mark told a funny story about dorm life to lighten the mood. Georgia teased Stella about her old law school photos. Even June chuckled. momentarily forgetting the gravity of their situation. Eventually, Mark excused himself to go catch up on class assignments. Georgia left to follow another lead, and Stella had client calls to return, leaving June alone in the conference room. She stared at the stacks of legal papers, the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning filling the silence. The fight was not yet over, but they'd landed a critical blow. One step at a time, she told herself, one step closer to freedom. Outside, the sky had turned overcast, threatening snow. June stood by the window, letting the chilled view mirror her emotions gray, waited, but still open to the possibility of clearing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations. Yet for the first time in a long while, she could face them with a measure of confidence. Buoyed by a team that believed in her, a son who stood by her, and a legal system that, however imperfect, had given her a chance to be heard. 1 week later, the landscape of her life had changed dramatically, like the aftermath of a storm that leaves both wreckage and renewal. The court-appointed auditor had begun scouring Harrow Capital's ledgers, a process that would take weeks but promised damning results. Financial news outlets ran headlines like Harrow Capital under scrutiny and CEO faces freeze order. Amid laundering allegations, Philip, once a media darling, was nowhere to be seen. Rumors circulated that even his board of directors demanded answers he couldn't provide. June settled into a small, temporary apartment Stella helped her find, funded by the newly accessible portion of her personal savings. It wasn't grand, just a simple one-bedroom with an old radiator clanking in the corner, but it was hers, free from the oppressive memories of the penthouse. She spent her days meeting with Stella about the divorce filing, coordinating with Georgia on evidence, and speaking occasionally with Dr. Hector Kim, who was preparing a formal expert opinion in case further litigation arose. Mark stayed in the dorms but visited her every other day. Their relationship felt stronger, built on mutual respect rather than superficial routine. Over takeout dinners in her small living room, they talked about the future Mark's career aspirations, June's possible return to the tech world once she was free from the shadow of Harrow Capital. She mentioned reviving her old software ideas, or maybe collaborating with Georgia on a data security startup. The thought lit a spark in her that she hadn't felt in years. Yet it wasn't all smooth. Hate mail arrived from a few loyal Harrow Capital employees who blamed her for the company's troubles. Paparazzi snapped photos when she stepped out to shop for groceries, thirsting for a sensational angle. Scorned wife brings down finance. Tighten. She ignored them as best she could. Her father's old advice whispered in her mind. Keep your integrity. The rest is noise. She wished he were alive to see how she'd finally used his lessons to stand up for herself. Then came the phone call that signaled a final turning point. Late one evening, her cell buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She answered warily, bracing for some new intrusion. June said a voice that sounded drained, older. It took her a moment to register it as Philip's. Her stomach flipped. She said nothing, letting silence fill the line. He inhaled shakily. We need to talk. The board is demanding my resignation. Everything is unraveling. His voice cracked for a split second. I never meant it to go this far. June closed her eyes, remembering the day he locked her out, the fear, the betrayal. I don't think we have anything left to discuss, Philip, except through our lawyers. A beat passed, thick with the weight of broken years. He murmured something that sounded like an apology, but she couldn't be sure. Then the line went dead. She exhaled, heart pounding. For a moment, she stood there, phone in hand, grappling with a swirl of emotions, grief, relief, anger, vindication. In the end, she placed the phone on the table and gazed at the modest apartment around her. She felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve. The man who once professed lifelong devotion had tried to dismantle her existence, but she had survived and was on her way to flourishing again. Stepping to the window, she looked out at the city lights. Each glow felt like a beacon of possibility. Tomorrow, she'd meet Stella to finalize the divorce filing. Soon after, the auditor's report might confirm the depth of Philip's crimes. Whatever storms lay ahead, she'd face them standing tall, unafraid, and finally, free. In the end, victory wasn't measured by what was gained, but by what was reclaimed: dignity, truth, and the quiet power of self-respect. The battles left scars deeper than any visible wounds, etched in places no one else could see, reminders of trust betrayed, loyalties shattered, and illusions forever dispelled. Wealth had changed hands, empires had crumbled, yet beneath it all lingered the haunting truth: some things can never be fully rebuilt. She had fought not just for justice, but to regain the person she once believed herself to be, the woman who had been lost in someone else's shadow. The price was steep: friendships fractured, innocence vanished, the comfort of blind trust forever stripped away. Yet in those losses lay clarity, a newfound strength rooted not in revenge, but in wisdom painfully earned. Now, standing alone beneath the pale glow of the skyline, she realized the true journey was inward, a passage toward authenticity, toward an identity no longer defined by others' expectations. And perhaps that's the hardest victory of all, recognizing that the most difficult battles are fought not with others, but within ourselves. How many of us, she wondered quietly, would have the courage to face that same journey no matter the cost,